Well, I think first and foremost, we're going to see relatively small numbers of workers. I mean, I think most of the banks have had at least a skeleton crew in buildings, but they've been more or less of a ghost town. And now, with this first phase, or rather second phase, actually, of reopening, which will be in the coming weeks, they may see at most 10% of their workforce coming back in most cases. And that's only on the banking side. I think in private equity and hedge funds, you're seeing fewer people coming back to the office, some private equity firms not bringing people back at all. But there's also some pretty interesting technology that's being deployed to help people social distance and feel safe. Things like, my favorite was a heat map that you can use a mobile app to look at the restroom on your floor and see how crowded it is or how recently it was crowded, and maybe divert to some other restroom if you want to keep your distance from people.
What about the idea of how voluntary, Kate, that this is going to be? Right. I had that reporting months ago about some of the pressure that traders felt at certain firms to go back to work, as did you.
Yep.
Is this going to be fully voluntary when it comes to the small numbers of people who will be invited? Is that the right word? Invited back?
Yeah, banks say it is. And I talked to a number of banks about this. Goldman and Citigroup were some examples I mentioned in the story, but they weren't the only ones who said this will be strictly voluntary. We want it to cut across seniority levels, and so that it's not just the junior, younger employees that feel like they have to come in, while the more senior employees are in, other locations. But yeah, I think there will be pressure in various places to kind of show face. As you mentioned, at B of A, for example, that's a place where certain people have said they felt pressured even prior to this to come back. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this shakes out. I also think executives have set different tones. James Gorman, for example, at Morgan Stanley, really hasn't been in the office, as I understand it. Obviously, he was sick himself for a period of time, but even after recovering, he didn't want to set a tone where people would feel like they had to come in. Mike Corbett from Citigroup has not come in. David Solomon of Goldman has been in the whole time, and he's had the floor more or less to himself. Goldman, by the way, has seemed to be fairly accommodating of workers that want to work from home and furnish them with a lot of technology and other tools. But you're seeing sort of a variety of messages depending on the culture of the firm.
How much smaller do you think? Oh, by the way, Gorman's going to be on Closing Bell later today, so I'm sure he's going to be asked about all of the issues that you raise as well, Kate. But how much smaller do you think firms are going to be on the other side of coronavirus forever?
That's a really good question. I mean, on one hand, I think it may open up recruiting policies so that you can actually cast a wider net. If you're comfortable with people working remotely, there are a lot more people you can recruit with different worldviews and skill sets. So that could be interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe the office footprints in the city are going to shrink. I know that's a concern of those who promote New York City and its interests. Another issue, Scott, that's interesting is, and I talked to Kathy Wild, the CEO of the Partnership for New York City, which is a nonprofit that helps the city bring and retain businesses here. She said that CDC's guidance on incentivizing workers to avoid mass transit if they can, that may be good public health policy, but that's going to be very difficult for the city, because if people can't take subways and commuter trains and buses, if they're not comfortable doing that, and companies incentivize them to drive privately or stay home, or, one example in the story is that Citigroup is exploring some leases in Long Island and Westchester so that workers based there don't have to commute in. All of that could have the effect of shrinking not just the financial services footprint in New York City, but shrinking the business footprint in general in New York City, which is not good for city and state tax revenue, which is not good for promoting this as sort of the hub of various industries.